Morning, everybody.
Not
Okay.
sure what's happened to my screen. I'm going to make something go away. I think Zoom is Zoom was trying to sell me something. I made it go away.
Are you with us?
I'm with you. Yes, I was with you before. I just couldn't see you because of this
Okay.
big
Okay.
thing.
All right. Well, we're starting this meeting of the Expenditures and Revenues Study Committee, the town subcommittee in particular. We're going to begin just with a quick roll call of those attending. Janet Gelbart.
Here.
John Doggett.
Here.
We have town officials here. Chaz Carey, our town administrator, Lincoln Heineman, Melissa Goff, Nicole Lima from the town staff. But for attendance purposes, we have, my screen just changed. Ruth Ellen Fitch, you're here?
Yeah, I'm here.
And I'm here, John Van Scoik. I think that's it, right?
That's all I can see.
Yeah. That's all I can see as well. Janet, I liked your suggestion, and insofar as you've suggested that we go through the draft report, the latest version of the draft report that is, I believe it is attached to our agenda. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was posted, and I think I emailed it to all of you because I knew Nicole was out, so you'd have an extra maybe 20 minutes to look at it before it got posted.
Yeah. There is one, I don't see it on the agenda that we approve minutes from our last meeting. Does that mean I can't call for a vote on approving the minutes from our last meeting?
Unfortunately, no. Sorry about that. That's our oversight. We'll put those on for your next meeting next week. So you'll have 2 sets of minutes for next week.
Okay, thank you, Chad.
John.
And I would point out, I have some corrections to the minutes, which hopefully our discussion today will address the biggest one. So
Can
that's
I
a good
also,
idea.
a minor, I'm just looking at the list of members present. My name should, I think, be John Doggett at Advisory Committee, not at large. Small change, small nit.
Oh, Advisory Committee Representative.
Yep.
Yes, John, I apologize for that problem in the minutes.
No problem.
All right, so we're not going to vote on minutes. We are
The
going to
minutes
go
are
to...
posted online. You can
Yeah,
vote
but
on
I
it.
don't think.
Yeah, but they're not posted as part of the agenda for
Yes,
this
they
meeting.
are.
Yeah, I don't think we know. Oh, are they? Did we notice them for a vote? Oh, I'm
No.
sorry.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I was looking at an agenda and it did not have a line in it that said approval of previous minutes.
It's in the agenda. Review and approve the minutes of February 5th.
Oh, okay.
There it is.
Then,
Sorry. Yeah.
right. Okay.
So
Then we can go ahead and approve those minutes. But John Doggett, you stated one change, so we'll make sure that change gets made.
I have a couple. Sorry.
What are your changes?
Well, the first comment is misleading in the way it reads when it talks about, and it's a question I have for Chaz, because I think I couldn't suggest a change because I don't understand how that top line 1.3 in the override proposal with 1.5 in savings and 0.5 roughly in new revenue comes out to something left over 0.4. I couldn't do the math. I can't figure out an easy way to say it, but the way I read the minutes, and they're not in front of me, I'm sorry, seemed to suggest that there was 1.2 million in fees, which is, it's more the way it was worded. And so I couldn't suggest how to fix the wording because I don't think that part is transparent. And my suggestion would be that we go through our discussion today and then come back and amend that unless someone else knows how to make it clearer. The part about the fees and the parking fees, that very first paragraph.
Yeah. I think we best hold off approval of the minutes. Does anyone disagree with that notion of holding off on approval of the minutes? And then those who have changes such as Janet just raised, or, you know, simpler, changes that could be conveyed to, why don't you convey any changes to me since I actually drafted these minutes? And then I will redraft and submit for the next meeting.
Okay, and yeah, and the other change is just adding a little bit of a descriptor in one of the other paragraphs, but I will, that one I can send you. This one we need to hear from Chaz, what that top line means for me to even think how to correct that first paragraph.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to switch
Um,
devices here. I'll be right back. I apologize.
Okay,
That's fine. That's fine. So I'm going to assume there's consent to not voting on the minutes and following the path that I just laid out for those who want to make amendments to the minutes before the next meeting, or changes to the minutes before the next meeting. And that gets us to the review of the draft report, which is attached to the agenda. And Janet, I take your suggestion as guidance that perhaps you could lead us through this and steer us towards the important changes from the prior drafts that we've been sent.
from the prior drafts, there were some language changes. I'm trying to do this from memory now because it's not in front of me. There were some language changes. There was 2 new sections. I wrote a little bit about other sources of revenue and some grants. All of the changes I made are in red. The other thing I did was highlight the places where we're missing data. And hopefully some of that will get filled in today. I have a commitment from Chaz that he and Charlie will find once Charlie resurfaces time to just, it's just plunking in some data things, and they may all be in the budget book that'll go online Friday. And I have an answer to one question from you, John Van Scoyac, which was about how much do we earn at least 3% on all of this money that we tuck in different places. And I cornered Lincoln yesterday, and he said the interest we earn on funds varies because some of them have limitations in law, but everything is earning at least the 3%, which was your threshold. If you want that in the report or any more explanation, you can get together with Lincoln and send it to me, and I will plop it in the next version.
Okay.
Yeah, there were, I actually found a correction somehow, somewhere snuck into, and Jesse may have, and I didn't notice it, under debt exclusions, that they have to be approved by town meeting, which they do not the debt exclusion vote itself. So those are the kinds of corrections I did. I amplified language. I keep making notes as people. I will have asked Ambraga for more information on the GIC so that the report doesn't gives some of the data that I didn't have when we met yesterday as to what the restrictions are, what the other communities live under that we don't, those kinds of things. So it's a fuller explanation. And the more I get feedback like that, I'm happy to dump it in, but nothing in there is what I would call substantive in terms of deliberation. It's more boilerplate of, this is the status of things. This is how we got here. These are problematic areas. And all of that deliberation comes out of, so in my mind anyway, here's the override proposal, and here's what happens if it doesn't get voted. And if you guys have other ways of looking at anything, we should probably discuss it while we wait for Chaz to come back. I don't know if Chaz did come back.
I don't see Chaz on the screen, and we are going to need his input on a lot of the questions before us today.
He's just logging in.
Okay, that's good. I was in on a meeting yesterday of the full committee, and I'm trying to remember if there were others. John Doggett, weren't you in on that meeting as well?
Yes.
Yes,
As was I.
as was Janet. In my mind, one of the big questions looming over all of this is a question that got discussed yesterday, and that is, to what extent do we want this report to be in full and including a lot of information that, as I understand it, is also included in the town staff's own explanation of our financial situation and how that dovetails with the question of putting an override question on the ballot. And is the draft report of the town committee essentially to be combined with the draft report of the schools committee? And is that is that what constitutes the report of the full committee? What are the steps that we take next, having in hand a town report and presumably a school report, and also having access to considerable material that can be provided by the town administrative staff to explain our financial situation? How do we pull all of those three things together? Is that indeed the challenge ahead of us? Do others want to comment on that?
I don't know.
If I could just add one thing, John, I maybe it's just a suggestion that the town committee completes its report, and we got a long way to getting it done, and the schools committee does the same, and that we have some kind of umbrella document, the beginning, if you will, or really the executive summary, which basically summarizes both of those reports, and maybe the futures as well. I mean, we could do the same, do this exactly the same, and just have a very small report of reports, if you will, so that the reader can see the whole gamut in front of them, and then they can dive in to the detail that we offer and that the schools offer and that the futures offers. Rather
Chaz,
than try and integrate it throughout, I think that trying to integrate it might be impossible.
Chaz, I don't know how much of the introduction to the question that John was just answering you heard. Essentially, I have posed the question of, at some point when there is a agreed upon final town report and an agreed upon final school report, I'm trying to figure out what the vision is as to whether those two reports together simply are combined, and that is the full committee's report. And how does that dovetail, if at all, with the work being done by administrative staff to explain in its own terms, what the need for the override is?
Right. I think it's a good question. I think John Doggett's suggestion is the right one, which is you have the separate reports and then you have an executive summary at the outset that summarizes the findings from each of those reports and the ultimate recommendations of the full committee with regard to the subcommittee's findings and recommendations, right? So in a similar posture to how, you took one of the recommendations from the school subcommittee yesterday and voted it through and, approved it. Then you'll have in that executive summary, a brief discussion of, there was, the committee recommends that the select board take up this question of healthcare liability, the split in healthcare, and address it this way. So that's the kind of vision I see, is that you have at the end of the process, a summary of your deliberations, your findings, and everything on that front.
I'm going to assume that at the next meeting of the full committee, it will be determined how that summary gets drafted.
I think so. That seems to be what Sadaf's aiming towards right now.
Yeah,
she's building out that Google Doc and assigning roles to people. And there are other reports, that individual members are taking on. Like, for example, Dick is working on the capacity of the town to pay, et cetera.
Yeah. All right. Then, Chaz, if you don't mind, as you see it, what would you like to see come out of today's meeting of this town subcommittee? Janet has briefly, touched on some of the missing pieces of information that need to be filled in the draft that's in front of us.
Yep.
But give me your overview of what you'd like to see come out of today's meeting.
I think if we can progress through the override recommendations, and I can talk in a little more detail about them, answer questions. Two of the requests from last week were, one, can you talk a little bit more about how this is broken out over years, like make it look more like a classic Brookline override, to see if that makes more sense to folks in terms of when the money needs to be brought online. And then the other was this question of, prioritization, and whether or not certain items need to be in here, or certain items that are not in here need to be in here. And the one item that I heard from the committee on was roadways. Happy to have, more discussion about that. But I think, in terms of what's beneficial to me or what's beneficial to us, it's really about what you all need, in terms of town staff, in terms of getting those blanks filled in your report. I will say that Melissa, Charlie, and I are very much heads down. We are gunning towards a noon tomorrow deadline to get the budget book out. And so I apologize that I don't have updated charts for you. I will have them by tomorrow at noon, because that's when they're going to be published. There's nothing that's materially changed in terms of the top line numbers of the override, but starting next week, I've just finished drafting the section of the budget book that talks about a potential override request and the contours of that request. So you'll have a narrative sort of baked and ready to go from town staff about, this is what we're asking for, this is why we're asking for it. But that's obviously subject to the subcommittee's review and recommendations, the full committee's review and recommendations, and then obviously the select board. So you'll have a lot more material, but unfortunately not until noon tomorrow.
Yeah. So the draft report, and Janet, you can help me with this. I believe it's on page 20 that we are looking at the most up-to-date table of
Actually, John, that last draft that I sent doesn't include anything that we got from Chaz, because I still wasn't sure it was new. So that's the old stuff. But
yeah. So Chaz, do you have an updated table
gave it
of?
to us last week, and I stared at it intently yesterday afternoon to compare the two. So I have some questions, but I'd like to start with the new one that he showed us last week, that we all said we don't understand the timing, because that very first line feeds into, I don't understand what the minutes are explaining, and I can't make the minutes clearer because I don't understand that line. And that's the 1.3 million. If you could put that chart up again, Chaz.
You're talking about continuity of service?
Is that the line? We got a chart we looked at something from Chaz last week, which totaled 5.3 million.
Projected continuity of service gap. Let me put this up for you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chaz.
And I'll take my hand down.
Okay.
So that very first line, continuity of service, I can't make the numbers add up. And when I looked at the detail of the revenue, it's less than transparent, because it nets out the improvements in the parking meter that was one of the items that didn't make the cut from your original one. There was, 5.1 million, and then another subset, which included roads. And then below that, something about parking meters. Yep. So that whole line, I think, needs to be unpacked in a way that the reader looks at it and they understand what you've done.
Yeah, we've been working on this in the budget book, so I can talk through it now, and I hope the narrative that we have will be a little more clear when we talk through it. So let's start at the top. The projected continuity of service gap.
That I got.
Yep. So this number here, the number in red, is the delta between the amount of expenditures we would need to make just to keep doing what we're doing now. So no changes, no new fire contract, no fixing the overtime, no sustainability, no police positions, none of that. just to keep going as we are going in FY26 into FY27. A true level, I mean, it's not a true level services budget because it has inflators for non-union salaries and at 1.5%, which is lower than last year, and also, and inflators for services and for goods, et cetera. So it's not a true level services budget, but it is a continuity of service budget. That's the gap between what we think we're going to take in revenue and what we need to spend on the town side. So this is the hole we need to plug in FY 2027 with either cuts, revenue increases, or a combination of the two. So that's our target for FY 27. Just to, and I keep, the phrase I use is to keep the lights on. That's what we need. So this line here is about how to close that gap and what therefore and how we get there. You will notice, though, you're right, Janet, it doesn't net out because there is extra money over here, and the purpose of that extra money is to seed this reserve that we were talking about, this operating reserve. I'll stop there. Questions
for a second. Yeah, that part I get, why there's that money left. I'm having trouble getting 1.3, 1.5, 1.5 and roughly 4.5. So if we said the cuts in the revenue is $2 million in rough numbers, of which continuity of service is 1.3, which leaves 0.7. And as I understood you, and in the last week, the reason we're not seeing 0.7 as a surplus is because some of those new fees need to be split, need to go through the split.
Correct.
So if I have it right, this doesn't jump out and tell you that. And that's a real problem, especially since that revenue, this is where we get into the minutes. There's a figure of 1.2 million in parking fees, but 460 shows up. And really the only slush, and that's, it needs to be fleshed out better. And then if you look at that 1.6 roughly that's left over, it's really only 400,000 because the other things have to happen in 28. Now, maybe the, 250, 275 maybe isn't for, the trees and stuff, but that 910, that's going to be there. That's a contractual obligation.
That's correct.
So for me, calling it 1.6, what I originally heard when I heard that number is that there's a substantial amount of money for 28 and 29 to cover unforeseens. So that number is really 400. And the question obviously is, if it doesn't get used, where does it go? Because that whole continuity of service is also very amorphous and not what we're used to seeing in an override is going to cover A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Yeah, I understand. And I can, well, I mean, so that's two, those are two kind of, well, actually it's three. Let's take one.
I know.
Let's walk through the revenue opportunities, right? We can break this down in more detail, obviously, and talk through it, but right. All of these are all of these numbers are post split. So remember, the schools will see 59% of the revenue increases from each of these decisions will go to them after and so when we budgeted these out, we know what they are across the board in terms of projected revenue increases, but then we know we are only assuming that the town is going to see 41% of that money.
And that needs to be clearer, it may be
right.
total town school.
Yep, we can give you the hard numbers there, but so this is post split. The parking violations. So I'll just try again. I'll walk through this, and I'll you'll have this in narrative form next week. But just to walk through it now so you can,
So we can talk about it.
right, grok it and talk about it, as it were. If we increase all of our violations to $40, from wherever they are now, so that's an increase of $5 for some, $10 for some, and $15 for some. And there are some that are over $40, so we're not touching those. We can't go higher than 50. And we need to have some wiggle room in there because we can't go higher than 50. If someone is delinquent for more than 14 days, we want to be able to fine them. So the fine for delinquency payment will go up to 50, and that's the maximum under state law that the Transportation Board can set for those fees. So in the absence of a compelling a state law that overrides it, that's the most we can get per ticket. So if we did that, based on a 5-year rolling average of revenue from those tickets, cutting out the 2 big pandemic years, FY20 and FY21, where no one was parking, and so that's not. We would see, if we took that average and then we ran it, we would see a projected revenue increase of $1.2 million. And again, that money has to go through the split. But in this case, before that money goes through the split, we are going to assume 2 things. One, people will be more careful and get fewer tickets because they cost more. And people's compliance will go up. And so the revenue that we realize from that compliance will go down, from non-compliance will go down. We will assume that 15% of people who would have gotten a ticket will say, oh man, I really don't want to get a $40 ticket again, so I better not do that, better not risk it. And they won't get those tickets. So take that off the top before the revenue split, before anything. Next, one of the things that DPW in particular, but all of these departments have been looking for is we got to talk about how to modernize how we do traffic enforcement. We need to invest better in checking the meters and, in figuring out and, have the meter repair schedule and figuring out who's responsible for what, who's issuing tickets when, how is this working? All of that hasn't been looked at in a long time. And it really, frankly, it worked, I think, as long as it did because the people involved, it was the people involved in it and not the process, right? There were good people who had been there for a long time, who knew how all this stuff ran. And if something didn't work, they could just fix it themselves. Now the people who are involved are all still good at their jobs, want to do well, but they don't have that the institutional knowledge. And when things go wrong, they don't know, oh, well, Todd Corain used to be able to just pick up the phone and make this happen. Well, Todd's not here. So we got to figure that out. And so we would invest some of the revenue from the increased fee, from the increased fines towards parking services modernization. And I want to make that a permanent part of the revenue because I anticipate that will eventually require us to hire somebody, a coordinator or something along those lines, to work across departments to make this work. And in the interim, before we hire that coordinator, I would like to bring in someone from the outside to basically assess our operations and recommend an ideal way to do this, so that we have someone who does the hard work coming from outside and gets the buy-in from the departments who are currently managing it about what works and what could be done better, et cetera. So take that $125,000 off the top and reinvest it in the service. This is similar to what we do with sanitation fees, for example. Sanitation fees, when they go up, have tended to flow back into the providing of service of sanitation as opposed to running through the split. So you take that off the top, $125,000 for the modernization of parking enforcement. And then you run the rest through the split. So multiply that by 0.41, that's the town share of the split. That puts you at $366,000.
Okay, so all that needs to be broken out. So when I look at it, I see it. But another question is, in the original list you gave us that went to ultimately something like 11 million, there was the line for road repair. It's a prioritization. There was something in there for modernization of meters.
That's right.
Is that this or
that's
is
this? Yep.
Okay, so all right, so it's a matter of, these are how the priorities were done, and this actually got covered. Because
Yes.
it looks like when I read what I'm looking at now, it fell off the table, but it
Right.
didn't.
And it did not. It's getting
Okay.
covered a different way.
All right, I just wanted to verify that's where I came to, but I didn't get the full explanation. Very confused. Okay, that's very helpful. So if we go back to the other page,
Sure.
I guess I'm still not being able to add up 1.5, 0.5, and 1.3 and 0.4, unless, yeah,
So let
I'm
me,
still having trouble with the math.
let me do some Excel magic. And we can see if we can help you here. So that's that. So it basically what it's doing is it's taking this number and it's subtracting all of these from it. So you're chipping away at this.
Okay, it's from that number. That's the piece that I was missing. All right.
Yep. This number is this number minus these three numbers. And
All
it
right.
gives you a little extra money in year one.
And a little extra money that stays. So if by some magic prices go down, nothing goes wrong.
Right.
We don't need that 428 or 29. Where does it go then?
So if we didn't need it in 28 and 29, which I doubt, I think we will.
I doubt it too, but I just want to walk it through.
For the next 3 fiscal years, this money will flow into an override stabilization fund. And the purpose of that stabilization fund will be to fund overages in the operating budgets for FY 28 and 29, if they exist. And so it will function as sort of a limited purpose reserve fund, specifically for those operating budgets.
And if it's not used in 29?
If it's not used in 29, the select board will have to, and advisory committee will have to decide what that looks like in the FY 30 budget. My recommendation would be that you let it fall to free cash.
Yeah.
You let whatever's in there fall to free cash.
And that's what I thought would happen, and I agree with you. I doubt it's going to be there. But just needing to clarify, this is where everything goes. Thank you. That answers my questions on this. It looks, I mean, from my perspective, and I stared at these numbers a lot yesterday, apart from that continuity of service, the big lines in here are contractual. It's hard not to do them. The 910, the 800, maybe not. It depends on how much you believe, if you think that the issues with sick leave amount to 800 grand, I don't know. If you look at it that, yeah, but every other town budgets twice what we do. People can talk about it. I just didn't see, and I will bring this into this meeting. I did go to Chaz's presentation at the Council on Aging on Tuesday, and I pushed him very hard on that senior center transportation because that is a key need for seniors. And I know that they put new things into place. Actually, they've already started for limiting the number of rides, for trying to target the needy people instead of everybody. Not clear that those projections will last. I have a commitment from him. I'm going to actually put it into this report.
Yep.
That if those monies aren't there, he will move hell and high water to keep that going because it's so needed for seniors.
Right.
I would imagine in a first year, as long as it's a budget line, it would be eligible for a reserve fund transfer. But can you break out how much is in those contractual ride things versus the changes that you're implementing in staff? I mean, I would like to see that. I would like to see how Sebastian came up with this plan that makes it viable. I can get that directly from Emily. If you have it, that would be good.
Great. Yeah, I have some materials from Emily on this. This roughly breaks down to a little over $100,000 for the program and $75,000 for what is 1.3 positions. It's bumping Sebastian up to full time. And it's putting, it's moving an admin position that's been supporting this program, among other things, off of soft money and onto hard money.
Right.
And what that does as a practical matter is it frees up that soft money for programming and services.
So potentially does that soft money, and this is of course Emily's decision, becomes another pot for supplementing that 100,000 that started
Correct.
out at 300,000. And the
Correct.
reason I am pushing this so hard is this is the red flag for seniors. If
Yep.
we want to propose something that will draw their votes, this is their line.
Yep. Agreed.
Okay.
And I mean, this has been a priority throughout this process. We said when we were putting this together in December, we have to preserve this program in some form, in some way. And my discussions with Emily said, look, the program in its current form is not sustainable. We are the last community that does this. It is unfortunate. I would love to fund unlimited free transit for medical rides. Like that's the dream. But every other community that's tried it has crashed out. We're the last. And we want to keep this going in a sustainable fashion. And I think Emily is doing really good work thinking through with her team, how do we do this in a way that survives? Because we can't lose it. It's too many people rely on it. So if we're not going to lose it, what is a way to run it in a sustainable manner? And I think she's got a good handle on that.
Yeah, she and I had a brief discussion of this. It's unfortunately, as with everything, getting through to the other side. I mean, you had a good crowd at the Council on Aging, but not, maybe 20, 30 people were there. And so how do you reach the rest of them who maybe open up their eyes when they see, oh, it's going to hit my pocketbook, but it is the ongoing problem. And not just for us, I think, anywhere. So
Yeah.
you've answered my questions. I don't know if anybody else has anything to push.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Janet, for asking those questions. I do want to open it up to other people, but first I want to just ask Chaz. So is what we're looking at on the screen right now, excuse me, the latest version of what you propose that be the override, question?
There's been a very minor change, which is this number, the IT number has gone up. And as a result, there's been some movement around with these numbers in order to accommodate the fact that IT needs a little more money. So that's gone up to 125,000, which means that these numbers have gone down a little bit in order to cover this, which means this reserve has gone down. The good news is most of the things that IT needs to cover are going to come in 28. So the overall impact on the reserve is limited. It's still around 1.6. So I will get you those updated numbers once we're done with the budget book. But the top line number, this 5.31 million, has not changed. This has not substantively changed. It is just play in the joints between this number and this number.
Okay, so given what Chaz has just said, are there others at this meeting who would like to ask some questions about what is in front of us? And I'm sorry, I can't see whether anybody's raising their hand, so just speak out.
I also want to address John Doggett's questions from last week. One was about timing over, how's this work over time? And one of those questions is, what about roads? Why isn't roads on here?
Yeah, John Doggett, is it okay if we just go ahead right to those questions?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, Chaz, go ahead.
Sure. So let's start with money over time. So if we were to structure this as we would in a traditional 3-year override cycle, spread this out, we would be asking for 3.67 million in year 1, 1.4 million, an additional 1.4 million in year 2, and an additional 0.24 million, 240,000 in year 3. So there would be a large increase in year 1, a much smaller increase in year 2, and a vanishingly small increase in year 3. But because we know that costs are going to continue to outpace our revenues, we know that graph that we like to display is going to be true, right? There's going to be the numbers as Sergio said yesterday, the numbers will continue to diverge. there are going to be expenses that we need to cover over and beyond the things we know about. This makes certain assumptions about the budget, but the realities are there's going to be growth that we need to cover. And so if we were to spread this out, these numbers would need to go up. The $1.4 million and the $0.24 million would need to go up. You would be looking more in the $6 to $7 million range for an override. What we have tried to do here in order to keep the town's number low is to say, if we charge that 5.31 million all at once in year one and sock away the money we don't need to spend later if we need to cover those unexpected expenses, then the total burden on the taxpayers is lower. Now, the obvious question that you might ask there is, well, what happens in FY29 when you've spent that money you've socked away and it became one-time money, and now you've got a gap? Now you've got a structural, once again, your structural gap will rear its head. How are you going to deal with that? And the answer to that is twofold. One, we talked about this yesterday, the pension obligation is going to change, and that's going to be a big deal. We continue to look, and the percentage of the percentage of debt funded by tax receipts is going to decrease after FY27. FY27 is going to be the biggest hit to taxpayers in terms of the money that they are paying in taxes going directly to fund excluded debt. That's when another big set of bond obligations comes online for the fire stations and for Pierce. And at that point, voters will be paying the largest share proportionally of the budget that they will ever pay, knock on wood, unless we go out and buy something else with excluded debt.
What year is that again? Just repeat, what year is that?
FY27, next fiscal year.
Oh, okay.
So once we get through that, the mountain starts to go down. The actual dollar amount paid kind of waggles a little bit in there, but as a percentage of the overall levy, because remember the levy keeps going up, it starts to go down. And so that means more money comes online and is available for general use. So between those two facts alone, and leaving out, the hope of economic development, et cetera, because you can't rely on that. You can't rely on money that doesn't exist yet, and you don't know when that money is going to come online. But you can at least reference the hope that, yes, we hope that, something passes that will work in Chestnut Hill West, et cetera, et cetera. But we can't put that into hard figures. We will be in a position going into FY30 where our financials will be stronger. We will continue to have a structural gap. We will continue to have revenues outpace expenditures. But we will be hopefully, the other thing here is that we're going to be doing some of the things the future subcommittee is recommending, including, getting our solar panels further online, reducing our energy dependence, doing the kind of stuff that's going to at least slow that and buy us time to continue figuring out ways to provide the level of service people expect. And if there are future overrides, hopefully they're not as big as this one. That's the goal. And so we continue to work that through, and we think that we will be in a better position in FY29, such that even though this taxing all in year one and then using the savings to cover in years 2 and 3 may put you in the hole in year 4. Year 4 looks much brighter than year 1 does. And so when you think about where we are specifically, that specific structure is the one that makes sense to us, rather than asking for $6 to $7 million on top of whatever it is the schools are going to ask for. Let's ask for 5.31, which also has the added narrative benefit of being less when adjusted for inflation than what we asked for last time. And we can, that's the message that goes out to the community, is that in real dollars, yes, we are asking for more money, but we're actually asking for less than what we asked for in 2023. We're trying to solve this problem with cuts and revenue increases elsewhere. We're seeing some success at that. But the drivers of our costs are, immovable, and, very difficult to deal with. And this is why we're doing what we're doing. so that's the structure question. And I gave you some numbers in there. Again, I apologize to keep repeating that you'll have it tomorrow, but you will have the narrative that goes into some detail on this tomorrow, including those numbers.
So Chaz, if I understand you correctly, 27 is going to be double hard because it's the biggest impact from the rest of the debt exclusions that were voted, plus the town's ask, plus the school's ask.
Correct, which is why I think Dick framed this really well yesterday when he said you already have to think about how much
Right.
people's taxes are going to go up in a no override scenario.
Right. So, but the reason you want to put the whole thing up front, apart from there's not a heck of a lot that you're not going to need in that first year,
Right.
is that you can earn money on that 1.6 that would keep what you're asking lower than if you didn't earn that money.
Correct.
Okay. And then for 30, which is the uncovered year, because in 31, we'll have reduced the pension obligation dramatically. Some of these other things, savings from solar, things we don't know of, adjustments you continue to make, and will help. And therefore we'll get through 30, but we know, I think we're not going to be able to ask for an override in 30.
I think it would be, I think the situation would be quite difficult.
Okay.
Ruth Ellen, do you have any questions?
I'm listening to the present thinking and how that affects, and the present structure and how that affects the next 2 fiscal years. And I don't know how to get that message across to the general public, that this really, we're thinking now, but we're also thinking ahead. But I think it's important to do that so that when we get to 30, we, really are almost starting anew. But I think the messaging has to be there for the public.
Yeah, we agree. And before an override question is finalized on the ballot, we do a website. We do an override central website with an FAQ with where is my money going? We put the tax calculator out there. How much will my taxes go up if this passes? And people can plug in their home address and see what that looks like. So yeah, all of that is important in terms of messaging out to the public.
Yeah, and I guess I would even say at a higher level than that. This is where we are today, 2 years strong, looking hard at year 3, or something to that effect, to make sure that there's an understanding, or at least we can point to an understanding that the structure in 3 years is going to be hard, or if that's not the right word, we're thinking about it.
Yeah.
I would point out and encourage Chaz is going to get it on the website. The presentation at the senior center was very well received by people who are asking all of these questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it was done in a way which I wasn't expecting, because it was billed as Budget 101. But apart from the very, very brief, this is how the budget is constructed, this is where the money come from, a lot of it focused on the override, and people were thankful to get the information. I don't know that it's ever been brought down to that level, because my recollection of the recommendation from BFAC pertained to town meeting, who were very resistant to learning how the budget works. But getting it to the people in that way is amazing. Just amazing.
I'm grateful for the feedback we've gotten so far. Yeah, that really was a positive meeting. Really, really great. And so you know, as I said, we're taking it on tour. We're actually expanding the tour. So I'm going to the Baker School. I've been asked to go back to South Brookline. And, you know, in terms of advertising it, right, we're going to get this out more. We're going to speak directly to the town meeting members in those precincts. We're going to tell 14, 15, 16, come on down. We're going to do it at Baker. Bring your friends, bring people who are asking you questions about how this works. Like, let's have it in the auditorium. Let's have this conversation. And I'm looking to try and do it at the Housing Authority. You know, again, it's just a critical constituency that people don't think about. But we have a substantial number of people in Brookline who live in public housing and who
Mhm.
are often totally divorced from the realities of politics, right? They don't think it, you know, they don't think we care about them. But we do care about them, and we want to have those discussions. And so those two are going to be in person, and then the big budget presentation to the select board and the advisory committee is next Tuesday. And then we're going to do the online budget 101 that with subsequent week, and that will be recorded. That will be on Zoom. We'll do the Q&A. We'll go through the presentation. It will be on this next year's budget rather than this year's budget, which the previous two presentations have used. And it will be publicly posted and available. You know, I would love if we could get the same sort of process on the school side. You know, I think that's really what's necessary. They got to go out. They got to go make their case to the public.
Yeah. But Chaz, in terms of making the case to the public, are you making the case for the information we saw in front of us in terms of, you know, what needs to be protected via the override?
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about, you know, this is where we think this is what we think we need in order to provide the services that people are telling us they want. And if that doesn't happen, then if there is no override, then here are the cuts we would make.
Yeah. Okay.
You know,
That prompts my question, because you know, and I really appreciate that you're doing this. Excuse me, clear my throat. But at the same time, it seems like you're on, you know, you're a step ahead of this process. You know, this process of the expenses and revenues subcommittees, and then the expenses and revenues committee as a whole,
yes.
getting behind what they think should be in the override question.
Yep.
So how do you deal with that?
I make it very clear in these presentations that these numbers are preliminary and that they're recommendations, that ultimately the decision maker is the select board, and it flows up from this subcommittee, then the expenditures and revenues committee as a whole, and then the select board. And I make it very clear that you know, this is just what we've been building internally. You know, and what we're doing now is we're pressure testing it, right? We're asking this body, and then we're going to go up through that political process to say, is there something that's in here that you don't want in here? Is there something that isn't in here that should be in here? You know, are these numbers right? Do they check out to you? We try and make repeatedly clear to the public that this is not the package, right? This is where we think we are. This is where we think we are internally. But it is not what you're going to see on the ballot, if you see anything on the ballot. You know, we try and be very clear about this is theoretical versus actual, and that there is a significant amount of process to go before anything, if anything, shows up on your ballot.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's just an unfortunate reality of the timing of everything, that it's important to be out there selling this and explaining it. But at the same time, it's not 100% clear that that's what's going to be on the override ballot. And so people might get very confused, you know, to the extent that they're paying careful attention and remember, they might be very confused if they suddenly see on the override ballot some issues that they never heard discussed before, and don't see some things that they have heard pitched to them as being, you know, something to be saved via the override.
Yeah.
And to that point, John, the biggest question that I hear over and over again is, what about the schools? Because I don't think they know their numbers well enough to do it yet, but also have reaching out beyond the school community, and that is so vital for Bella to start doing.
Yeah. I'm going to keep, asking a couple of questions here, but
Sure.
please, people, just jump in and cut me off if you want to ask your own questions, because I'm looking at the screen and I'm, I don't think anybody's using the hand raise function, so it's a little hard for me to guess if people are chomping at the bit with something to say. So don't be shy about jumping in. The next thing I wanted to ask is, at the meeting yesterday of the full committee, there arose a couple of questions that, provoked quite a bit of discussion. And one of them was, should there be some consideration of whether to do a 1-year override as opposed to a 3-year override? And the other, which actually got raised by you, Chaz, and I appreciate knowing this, that there has been quite a bit of departmental chatter about doing a school override and a town override as, two separate decision points for voters, who vote on an override.
Yep.
Do you want to just, in case anybody here today didn't catch that discussion yesterday, just put that on the record?
Sure. There was committee members raised a question about whether or not we put a 1-year question on the ballot as a stopgap. We talked about what those numbers would look like on the town side. Again, I said earlier that for year 1 it's like 3.67, but I rounded that up a little bit because we know just the play in the joints and the terms of things that wouldn't be there. I rounded that up to 3.8. Said if you were to put a 1-year override on the ballot, just covering those year 1 issues. So again, no new fire contract, no IT, no sustainability, no IT continuation beyond FY28, then you'd be at around 3.8. On the school side, I believe it was 6.3, 6.4, if I remember correctly. So you're already at $10 million. And if you did, as I believe Sergio suggested, and put the whole town question on the ballot and just 1 year for the schools, then you're at around 11.6. So you could do that, but I think it raises a couple of practical concerns. One is, how big are those school numbers in 28 and 29 going to be, and how much can you get them down realistically between now and FY28? Do you then put at risk if you do a true 1 year, do you then put at risk what are really critical town priorities in terms of fire and sustainability, which would then be the only things on the ballot in FY28, potentially yoked to the schools, and this issue of, and the voter fatigue that you then have. Oh, we had an override last year. Why is there another override on my ballot?
Right.
And then, even if you, and again, right, the same problem that arises in terms of, what are we doing? This money is not going to be there if you do a true 1 year, and so your town out years would be higher, and that would only add, I think, to the voters' unease at passing one override after another. And then again, think about your practical consequences here. FY27, FY28, you have a vote in 26, you have a vote in 27. Are you going to have a vote in 29? Are you going to have yet another? Are the schools going to come back and ask again? Are you going to have 3 votes in 4 years? I think at that point you really run the risk of voter fatigue. You really run the risk of the voters throwing up their hands and saying, asking us 3 times in 4 years for this kind of money is crazy.
But this, let me just say, add to that a little bit. There's a trust question also involved that I think it becomes really important as if if overrides are asked for on a continuous basis. So that, to me, that's very important. So
Yeah.
And I think, for example, one of the things that, not to harp on Arlington, but I think because they have a history and have built that trust with the community, they often can serve as a good model. One of the things their select board does is, before they set a ballot question, they also set commitments to the community. And those commitments include, the budgets are going to go up by this amount every year. And we're going to guarantee that. We're not going to make cuts below this amount. So you're not going to hear questions from the community of, you raise my taxes and then you cut services. Okay, so there, and they lay out very clearly the priorities of this override are X, Y, and Z, and we're not going to come back to you before a certain fiscal year.
Right.
And then they put the question on the ballot. And so you have, hand in hand with the question, a promise from the select board, their select board, that they're not going to come back to you. They're going to use this money wisely. There's a floor in terms of how much expenses go up every year so that they can't pass it and then gut the schools or gut the town. So it's a process that has been developed over time and built that trust that Ruth Ellen's talking about.
Mhm.
We don't have that. We don't have that tradition here. But it's worth thinking about how to build that community trust so that if we have to make these asks, the community understands that they can trust what they're seeing. And I think Arlington's select board meeting tonight, they have been very cagey about what their override number is going to be. I think it's going to, what I've been seeing from their presentations on the school side, it's going to be massive. It's going to be much bigger than anything that any other community has ever put on the ballot. We're talking in the $20 to $30 million range.
Wow.
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 Yeah. Their schools are really, I mean, I do not envy them. They are making significant cuts, and when they lay out their no override scenario, they're talking about a gap of close to $40 million over 3 years. So I don't envy Jim Feeney, the town manager over there. He's got a lot to deal with, but he's been keeping that very, very close to his chest. He has not put that number out there. And so I'm hoping tonight that they will, and we'll be able to kind of benchmark where we are in terms of what other communities are doing. Because right now, the largest override in terms of sheer dollar value was not Medford, sorry, Melrose, 13.5 million, beating us out. We were the biggest before that. But as a percentage of their budget, Melrose's budget was only around $77 million. So adding 13 million to that budget was much more significant.
Right.
Adding the 12 million that we put in 2023 to our 3 million
Mhm.
budget.
Yeah.
We'll have to see how this all fits together. But looking, the question is, the problem is the question is framed in terms of dollar value. So you're not asking voters, do you approve letting your taxes go up by X percent or the levy to go up by X percent? You're asking them for a raw number. And that has different psychological impacts. People look at 15, 20, $25 million. They say, oh my gosh.
Right. Yep.
And just to remind everyone, and especially me, what is the raw number total that we're looking at now, given, and granting that the school number isn't 100% nailed down, but what are we talking about? Are we talking about a $15 million override, 14, 13, 12, 11?
I really am waiting. Really, I hope this is going to be tonight, right? The schools are now at a point where they know what we think their revenue number is going to be for 28 and 29, assuming that the select board and the advisory committee agree to hold the financial policy steady in terms of what we're recommending through this override cycle, through this putative override cycle. They now know what those numbers are. So they should be able to give us top line numbers for 28 and 29. We have it for 27. I think we know at this point where the schools are in 27, but I don't want to speculate where they are in 28 and 29 because I don't want to set expectations, and I don't want to be unfair to them. I would assume now having that number, doing a lot of work, crunching it and thinking about, all right, what cuts or what assumptions do we make in 28 and 29 to get those numbers lower? And what's the final top line number that we're going to be asking for? So my hope is as soon as they can that they're going to come back with that. But again, just think about it in terms of what we know, right? We know that 1 year, or this hybrid 1 and 3 already puts you at 11.6. How much more are we going to see in 28 and 29 from the schools? What's that need going to be? How acute is it? So I don't know the answer to that. But I know, I know it's going to be high.
Anybody else want to ask any questions right now?
John, quick question. I think Chaz mentioned two, or you mentioned two questions I had from the last meeting.
Yes.
Roads.
Roads.
And I didn't hear anything about roads.
Yes, sorry, we got sidetracked a little bit, John. Thank you. Roadways. This, as you pointed out last week, John, I think this is a question of politics versus policy.
Yeah.
You know, the commissioner, Aaron Shute, and I talked a lot about this. And we said, on the one hand, yes, the cost of paving roads has gone up. It's gone up from where it was in 2023 when we made that initial $2.1 million investment and said, we're at least going to hold roads. The point of that $2.1 million was to hold our roadways steady and then to be reliant on the state and the federal government to the extent that we could to basically push that up, to start making our pavement management number go up as opposed to down. Subsequent to that, inflation and politics and tariffs and so forth drove the cost of making paving roads much higher. And so once again, we're on this downward trajectory because we've invested a lot, but the target keeps going up. The difference, though, is that in 2023, we had a complete streets policy that was all-encompassing. It basically said you can't touch a road unless you go through the complete streets process, unless there's an emergency. And the complete streets process is, well, we got to get bicycle advisory involved. We got to get pedestrian advisory involved. We got to talk about multimodal transportation. We got to talk to the T. We got to talk to, we have to do a lot. And that, in addition to adding time and complexity, it adds money. You run the risk of turning every small roadway project into a giant roadway project, which means, all right, well, we got to hire a consultant. We got to game out what a bike lane would look like on this street. Do we need a bike lane? Where is it? You know, all of that stuff. And that had the practical impact of slowing down and increasing the cost
Right.
of the roads that we were working on. And the select board eventually, when we talked about this with the select board said, well, can we not do that, please? Can we change this policy? We know that complete streets are important, especially for major arterial roadways like Washington Street, like Beacon Street. But the idea of doing this on side streets that have potholes in them and people are, you know, losing their transmissions, jumping up and down on them, seems silly. Can we figure out a way to do this differently? And so the commissioner, along with the select board liaisons, it was Paul Warren and Mike Sandman, and a consultant and the DPW engineering team got together, and they basically came up with two policies. One is a revised complete streets policy that very clearly delineates when we're going to go through that more detailed process. And then there's a pavement management plan, and that plan is for everything else. And that has had the practical impact of bringing down the time and the cost it takes to do roads. And so the commissioner has said, yeah, I think right now, I will never say, you know, honestly, I would never say no to more money for roads. We always need more money for roads. We're always going to have more roads to do. If you give me more money for roads, I will find projects to spend it on. We do not lack for roadway projects. But I would like to see more data from this new hybrid system before I start saying more money, more money. I would like us to figure out how much better we're getting at doing more projects and doing them quickly and how that is impacting our overall pavement quality. And once we have that data and I have a better picture of is our quality stabilizing, going up or going down, we would assume it to be going down because we know the cost has gone up. But what we don't know is how our change in policy has impacted the overall work that we're doing. And we need more data in order to do that. So rather than putting the cart before the horse and saying to the public, you love roads, we could always use more money for roads, please give us money for roads, we said, let's gather the data and figure out how much money that is, or if we need it at all, before we start asking the public for more money in that line item. Now, John, to your point last week, yeah, if you gave us more money, if the public gave us more money for roads, we would spend more money on roads. And probably we would get more projects done. But you also have to remember there's a capacity issue there too. Ultimately, DPW, you know, highway and engineering, there are only so many people, and there are only so many consultants we can hire. At a certain point, you start to hit diminishing returns.
But all, Chaz, if I may.
Yeah.
That's all fine, but the problem is the voters are going to vote on results. So, and further study doesn't usually cut it.
Right.
So what might help here, in terms of more data, is how many roads have we paved? How many miles of road have we paved in the last 5 years, year by year, or something of that kind? So, in other words, how bad is the problem? And, well, not how bad is it? What have we done? And whatever we put towards this, what could it do? Would be helpful, I think. I still think it's very dangerous to do further study. This is all good stuff, but it should have been done a long time ago. And it's like jam tomorrow. It's like, I'm sorry, but try again next time. And politically, it doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah,
Right.
if I may just jump in with a comment, and given the extraordinary winter that we're having, it doesn't recognize that there are some years that are much harsher than other years in terms of the impact on our roads. And we need to recognize that and say the number of roads that are in extreme need of repair is more than we thought it was going to be. And therefore, we're adjusting, how many roads we're going to deal with in a given year. And that means how many more millions of dollars to fix roads. And I can see it happening this very winter. If you just kind of take a walk around town, you can see all kinds of examples of extreme damage to roads. And the thought that we would sort of go through an override ask and not include in that something that recognizes that we need more money than we thought we were going to need. And so part of the override is X amount of dollars that will be committed entirely to catching up with the damage caused by the current winter to our roads.
I can ask the commissioner those questions, right? How are we doing? How have we done so far? And how much do we think the bad winter that we've been having is making things worse? I can ask those questions.
Okay.
I
And
would-
Chaz, if it's possible to get data that we can
Yep.
put in a graph.
Yep.
Because I think that then first of all, it tells the public that we really paid attention to this point. The news may or may not be good. I mean, we don't know what the data says, but I think having that data will be very helpful. And when it comes to that point, and that's assuming that point is in and not out at the moment, it's probably moot. But I think that we all agree that it might be a smart idea to include it.
Mm-hmm.
I would also throw in sidewalks because again, I'm always walking. The potholes bother me when I'm trying to cross the street. But sidewalks, there is a gap in the sidewalk outside my condo. It's almost a step up. It's about the size, and this is a tree root problem. I recognize that. So something that addresses that as well, because that is again a senior issue. And
Yep.
again, seniors vote in large numbers.
Yep.
But I would also encourage us as we discuss it. I agree with everything that's been said. We will ultimately have to evaluate if that's our recommendation, whether we're increasing the 5.3 or where we would take a meaningful number from. And I say meaningful because the big ones, unless we somehow eliminate continuity of service, which that's the great big number and it's very amorphous.
Yeah.
But what would we make go away if we said we're going to add X? And what's a meaningful number to add for X? Because we've always talked in terms of a couple mil. Although I think many, many, many moons ago, and John might remember that there was a commitment to put, I think, a few $100,000 a year toward roads into the COP as an escalator, and that don't do much anymore.
We continue to do that, right? Like this
Yeah.
Once again, this year is going to be the highest for roads. But the other thing that you have to remember too is one of the cuts that we're making to balance the budget is reducing the CIP. right? Reducing the revenue funded CIP. That's the single biggest cut that we're making. That yields, close to $800,000 on the town side and more on the school side. Now, how that manifests in the CIP because of the community's priorities is roads aren't touched, but that just means fewer other things get done, despite the need. Roads still funded very well. But, the eagle-eyed voter may well look at this and say, you're playing a shell game here. You're cutting the CIP, and then you're adding money for roads. So you're uncutting the CIP. But you're saying that that money is roads only. You're basically creating a shadow, or again, I think a shell game is the right way to talk about it, right? You're taking out of this pocket here, and then you're putting it in this pocket. Why don't you just say you're doing that instead of putting it to the voters like it's an increase?
It's actually a reprioritization. If you're saying that even with your $800,000 cut, you're not going to touch what's in there for roads, and we're putting in X amount for roads, it's a shell game within the CIP. Or it can be viewed as a reprioritization of the CIP. I have a question, and it's a little bit off this direct topic, but it is about maybe other places we could look for things. What are the rules? And I hate to bring it up because, I'm not advocating for this, but I'd just like to know, what are the rules for OPEBs? We talk about the extra money that's put in, that has been been voted to be put in and now is not, but there's a $5 million base. So my questions is the OPEB fund also under the control of the retirement board, therefore not touchable by what we say unless we convince them to do it? And is there a downside to say we can free up, and I don't even know the right amount, but we plan to address OPEBs starting in 31 somehow? Is there a downside with the Raiders, the Moody's people, and all of those? And just because, again, I'm not recommending, I just want to know the parameters so that we can say, we looked at everything, guys. We absolutely looked at everything. And Lincoln has his hand up, John, who probably has answers.
Yeah, Lincoln, go ahead.
I can chime in and give the answer some of your questions there, Janet. So the OPEB funds are under the management of the OPEB committee, which is constituted by the five members of the retirement board plus two other members appointed by the select board. And to your second question, could you repeat it? I'm sorry.
Is it touchable? We know that the
right.
retirement funds are locked in, but is this also locked in? And if not, what are the repercussions if we start playing with those numbers a little bit in the short term?
Right. So all the funds that have been designated to the trust so far would need to be spent on OPEB, right?
Correct.
I mean, they could not be pulled back, but and certainly the ratings agencies, definitely is similarly to pensions. There's always a conversation whenever we're on a ratings call about how are you funding your OPEBs? What's your OPEB funding plan? They've heard the plan, right? That's in place now, and that's been approved in the policy by the select board. If that changes, we'd have to tell them, right? Because they'll ask. But does that answer your questions?
Well, but we can change it. The OPEB board
yes. It can be changed. So, for example, unlike pensions, the amount that is appropriated towards the outstanding OPEB liability each year may go down, from one year to the next, right? And it may stay steady, unlike pensions and the current scheme for pensions. However, there would almost, eventually doing that will have an impact on our bond rating. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So it's something we can do if we were pushed to extremes, and I don't know if where those extremes start. It's $5 million that can be reduced by X. Nobody's stopping us from doing it, but it might not be fiscally prudent because it could have an impact on our bond rating. And that's where a lot of our commitments are now. So what we currently project is 50 million, may become 55 if we don't get those favorable interest rates. And I'm pulling amounts out of
Right.
the,
Perhaps higher than that. Right. So
Okay.
almost certainly higher than that. But yes, legal, but not advisable. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we're well past an hour into this meeting, and I wonder, Chaz, is there a particular vote that you were hoping to get out of this meeting?
I was thinking that a vote would happen next week. What I will do is I will take this back. I will take the comments back. I will try and build out something that includes. I will try and build out two versions of this. One that includes a roadway line item and one that doesn't. What you have now, and then a revised version that includes a roadway line item. I will also get some answers to John Doggett's questions so that we can have that before we have any conversation there. I think my last question is there anything else on this list that is not on there that needs to be on here, for either from a needs perspective or from the voters need it perspective?
I mean, I have a question, and in some respects, it may be, some people might think of it as a philosophical question. I don't know what is the best approach in terms of getting voter approval of an override. I do know what are the driving numbers behind our needing an override. And those driving numbers tend not to get reflected in the override ballot question. For example, so our benefits are going up by $10 million from 1 year to the next in the budget. If they went up by what the tax cap constrains us to, they'd only be going up $3 million. So there's 7 million right there over and above what we are able to extract from our tax base. That's a huge number. It's almost the equivalent of the townside number. And yet the townside number, gets defined as the list that you put in front of us today, that we've been talking about. And I don't have an answer to, would we be better off just saying the extraordinary drivers of our deficits are the benefits, the pensions and the healthcare. What in order to cover that, we need an additional $7 million or $8 million. And if we don't get it, we're going to have to do a fair amount of cutting of operations in our departments, operations such as XYZ, et cetera. An extraordinary snow year, is another sort of a driver. And how do we translate that into part of the ask? To me, that's a lot more persuadable item than some of these other items. To say, you all know, you've all seen it. Anyone who drives around town has seen the extraordinary damage that this winter is causing to our roads. And therefore, we're going to need an extra $3 million to do an extra $3 million worth of road repair. That's something people can get their arms around and I think would be inclined to support. But we don't see that in the current formulation of the ballot question. Does anybody else want to comment on what I just said?
I'm thinking about it, John. Part of my problem with our discussion yesterday is that the healthcare costs that the town has are a contractual obligation, like most of what we're looking at in the override ask. The question that people ask me, because they're all aware wow, health insurance is so much in the other towns. So this is something that's not just the policy wonks. It's people
Yeah.
that I talk to. And when I say, but for right now, it's contractual, they understand. So to me, rather than say we would ask money for these things, we should be saying, and there's light at the end of the tunnel on the pensions, because they'll be caught up, although I don't know what happens if the market crashes, because that's a factor. And we can say we are pushing very hard to renegotiate that with the unions, but until that gets renegotiated, we can't do anything about it. It's contractual. So because we have to absorb that, we need to ask for these things, because it's really, am I taking it from my left pocket or my right pocket, or putting it into my left pocket or my right pocket? There's one pot of money. I always complain because I sometimes wonder if the schools recognize it's only one pot of money when they keep saying the town should provide. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's a framing thing, but it really comes down to the same thing. It's going to cost us X. Benefits take up so much percentage of X. We can't not fund them, so we're asking for help in these other things. Or we say, we're going to ask you to help us fund the benefits. Because I think that, in my mind, as a taxpayer, gets murkier. I don't know what John Doggett thinks, or Ruth Ellen.
Anybody else want to comment?
Not me, no.
Okay. Well, I'm not aware of any other business we need to take care of at this meeting. Am I missing something?
No, I think at the next meeting, in addition to voting on this, we need to explore more the cuts, because the slide that Chaz put up Tuesday is very different from what we've seen here. And that's also not yet final, but it included a heck of a lot more coming out in terms of staff, year 1, year 2, if there's no override. So I think we need to go into that. I agree with Chaz. If we don't vote whatever we're voting on, we won't be able to have a final report that we vote on the 26th to present to the full committee. And I've already advised Sergio and Sadaf that saying we'd report out on the 25th isn't doable, because that was when Sergio told me we would have our numbers on the 10th instead of the 13th.
Mhm.
So maybe, I mean, we're scheduled next week for an hour and a half. I would suggest that maybe we need that to be longer, and we should schedule a meeting for the 25th. I am taking the minutes this time and next time because it's hand in glove with me trying to continue to put at least the boilerplate on paper. So maybe between now and next week, I can put down everything we've discussed so far, so we know where we're going, and then we can drop in the new information and take, but it would make it, I've just been trying to stay ahead of what can we stick down on paper, and that's over, and then fill in, because we don't have a lot of time to start writing at the end. It would also be very nice, and I'm looking at John and Ruth Ellen, because John Van Scoyoc is not allowed. I would love it if someone, not me, did, once we're finished deliberating, the executive summary and the recommendations and conclusions, because my head doesn't, I think in headline terms, and I don't want to write something that you guys say doesn't go deep enough. I tend to be very summary in how I phrase things. So maybe John and Ruth Ellen can take a whack at it. I'd asked John Van Scoyoc, I think he did say something to Jesse about being willing to do it, but he's been banned as a townwide.
I've been banned from a lot of things.
They said he's not allowed to write, and I tried.
That was like the First Amendment issue. So yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at it, but here's the thing. I always write the executive summary when all else is done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm quite happy to do that, is to, when all else is done, I will then have at it. If I've got, but I don't want to be on a moving target to writing an executive summary that has to change every 2 minutes.
And that's what I've been trying to tell Jesse, who started with an executive summary and recommendations and conclusions that basically said, this is what the town wants, this is what we're doing, and all the numbers change. And we don't know if we agree with what they're doing. I don't think that recommendations and conclusions in executive summary can begin to be drafted until after our next meeting, when we have to commit to summing up, voting what we're voting, so that whoever is writing knows what they're writing. So John does the executive summary. Is anybody willing to do conclusions and recommendations? I'm going to put what I can on paper. That might make that task simpler, because we'll have very clearly, this is what we have, this is what we're voting. And Chaz is, I mean, we'll all have access to the ultimate numbers Friday, tomorrow, when the book goes online. And Chaz has committed to me to provide me data ahead so that I can continue to keep writing. And that would be the roadway stuff, hopefully the stuff from the Council on Aging. I have it in the minutes as I write the minutes. I've been making notes of, these are my questions. These are one-offs with Charlie, who is at this meeting. I'm not sure how his head is above water, because they've also been doing their travel roadshow at the same time, and cannot thank them enough for everything they do for this town, and all the extra hoops they have to jump through, because everybody in Brookline is telling them how to do their jobs.
With that, if there's no further comments, I
Well,
think
can
we
we-
should.
Can
Huh?
are we going to schedule a meeting for 2 Thursdays from here? Because that's not on the schedule. And can we agree we'll stay for it for 2 hours next week? We're scheduled for an hour and a half.
Well, as needed. I mean, I think we should just assume that that's on the calendar. We're on the calendar for the next 2 weeks. If need be, we will go beyond the hour and a half, to the best of our ability. There's only,
Okay.
people are either available or they're not,
Yeah. And when is
Right.
our next meeting date?
Next Thursday at 9. It's
The 19th?
Yeah.
Yeah.
from 9 to 10:30, and we've just added the 26th from 9 to 10:30, with the understanding that both of those meetings may need to run longer for us to get it done.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, and that'll be in the minutes too. And now, John, I understand enough to be able to send you my amendments to the minutes that we didn't vote on today.
Yes, I was going to just remind people to do that. And so there's yours, and I think John Doggett, you maybe had a couple
My small net, yeah.
corrections. Okay, I'll look forward to receiving those. Thank you, everyone. It's time for this meeting to adjourn.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, staff.